3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing in a hospice corridor in my scrub top, clipboard against my hip, when my phone lit up with a message from my sister. "You're not welcome this year. Christmas at the lake is for parents only now." My family had voted me out the way a town council votes down a zoning request, quietly, efficiently, and without a single person calling to tell me the meeting had even happened. I read the message twice, tucked the phone into my pocket, and finished my shift, because that is what nurses do. Then I drove home, sat down at my small kitchen table, and smiled in a way that would have unsettled my sister if she'd been there to see it. I didn't beg. I didn't call anyone to plead my case. I opened my laptop and booked a balcony suite on a cruise ship sailing straight through Christmas Day, bound for the Caribbean. But the cruise isn't really the story. What my family did once the pictures surfaced, and what I later learned they'd been quietly arranging behind my back for over a month, that's the part I still can't get through without my hands going still. Welcome back to the channel where the stories women kept locked away finally get told out loud. Stories about the families who taught us to shrink and the mornings we decided to stop. If any part of this reaches you, say so in the comments and stick around, because this one earns every minute of it. To understand that text message, you need to understand my life first. I've spent 14 years as a hospice nurse in a small Ohio town. When someone's father is dying at 3 in the morning, I'm the voice on the other end of the phone, sitting in kitchens that smell like old coffee and fear, explaining what the next few hours will hold. I'm good at that work not because I'm delicate, but because I don't flinch. Dying people don't need company that cries with them. They need someone who stays in the room. That November, 3 afternoons a week, I sat with a retired math teacher named Ruth. 81, sharp enough to cut glass, no husband, no children. The first day we met, she looked me over and said my shoulders were shaped like a coat hanger everyone else used. I liked her instantly. She graded my small talk the way she must have once graded essays, and she noticed things. One afternoon she asked, out of nowhere, who took care of me at Christmas. I laughed it off and changed the subject, which is exactly what caretakers do instead of answering. She let me get away with it that day. She would not let me get away with it forever. Weeks later, in that same quiet room, Ruth would say one sentence that ended up saving my life. I mean that with a nurse's precision, not a storyteller's flourish. But we're not there yet. First, you need the family tree, because you can't understand what was taken from me until you see everything I'd spent years quietly handing over. My mother, Margaret, is 67, widowed 6 years, and the unofficial pillar of the women's group at her church. My older brother, Grant, works in insurance an hour away, married to Brooke, who runs school fundraisers with the discipline of a small general. My younger sister, Dana, lives 40 minutes off with 3 kids, the youngest of whom calls me Aunt Wendy, a title I've never once corrected. And then there's the lake house. My father built it with his own hands on the shore of Lake Erie back when we were children, low, gray, a porch that looks straight out over the water. Every single Christmas of my life happened inside that house. I put up the tree the first weekend of December every year. I baked the ham. I bought and wrapped the stocking gifts and signed them from Santa so my sister could sleep in. When our mother's knees got bad, I was the one who drove her out there, with the good tablecloth folded across my lap like something sacred. Last year's family Christmas card was a photograph of all 5 grandchildren on that porch. No adults in the frame at all, just the kids, the lake, and a caption calling it the family. I remember holding that card, noticing something small and cold settle in my chest. I wasn't in the photo. Neither was anyone who couldn't reproduce. Nobody else seemed to find that strange. I told myself it was sweet. That's the thing about a family like mine. The eviction never starts with a text message. It starts years earlier, with a Christmas card everybody calls adorable. There's a part of this I don't usually say out loud. I married a good man named Aaron when I was 29. Between 31 and 34, we went through 3 rounds of fertility treatment. 3 Decembers in a row, I sat in a clinic parking lot and listened to someone with a job just like mine tell me gently that it hadn't worked. The marriage didn't survive the 3rd try. No one cheated. We simply ran out of things to say to each other. He remarried. I hear he's happy, and most days, I mean it when I say I'm glad for him. What survived the divorce was a savings account I'd opened during our first round of treatment, labeled Someday. By the time the paperwork was final, It held just over $9,000, and I couldn't bring myself to touch it or close it. It just sat there, a nursery with the lights permanently off. Here's what grief does to a caretaker. It turns straight into chores. I became my family's fixer, every school pickup my sister couldn't make, every form my mother needed a nurse's eyes on, every birthday cake and airport run and holiday cooked and cleaned up after. If I couldn't give this family children, some part of me decided I'd pay my way in another currency. Nobody ever said that arrangement out loud. They didn't have to. I wrote the contract myself and signed it alone. There was one more payment, bigger than every other one combined, that no one in my family's group chat had the faintest idea about. Something I'd been quietly doing for 6 years that makes what came next almost funny. Almost. We'll get there. First, the text. A Wednesday afternoon, early December, I was charting in a hallway when the family group chat lit up. The one with the little Christmas tree icon. My sister runs the way a general runs a briefing. Her message was long, clearly drafted in advance, which somehow made it worse. She wrote that things had felt chaotic at the lake house last year, that the children's sense of magic needed to come first, and that after talking it over, they'd decided to try something new. Christmas at the lake house this year would be for parents and kids only. Then in its own little bubble, it's only for parents now, followed by a heart emoji, followed by you understand, right? You're the fun aunt, we'll grab lunch in January. Lunch in January. 35 Christmases spent in that house, and I'd just been rescheduled like a dentist's appointment. I stood in that hallway and watched the replies roll in. My brother gave it a thumbs up. My sister-in-law posted a laughing Santa gif. And my mother, the woman whose porch lights I string up every November, whose entire medication schedule lives inside my purse, said absolutely nothing. In my family, silence is a vote. I typed 4 different replies and deleted every one, each smaller than the last, until what remained was nothing at all. I put the phone away and went back in to check a patient's morphine drip. A stranger, whose family had driven 400 miles just to be there with her. Nurses notice everything. It's practically a curse. I'd love to tell you I went scorched earth that same night. I didn't. I did something more embarrassing. I negotiated. I offered to cook the whole dinner and leave before it was served. I offered a motel nearby, just slipping in Christmas morning to watch the kids open stockings I fill every year, though I didn't mention that part. I could hear myself shrinking with every offer, like a price tag crossed out again and again at an estate sale. My sister was sweet through the whole call, which is exactly how she wins. It's not personal, she said, in the voice she saves for her youngest wanting a snack before dinner. It just confuses the kids to have extra adults hovering. Extra adults. Sit with that phrase the way I had to. 38 years old, reclassified overnight as surplus furniture. And because my sister always adds one sentence too many, she followed it with, honestly, we all talked it over and everyone agreed it's healthier this way. Everyone agreed. When exactly did everyone agree, I asked. A pause followed, the exact pause I recognize from families about to lie about how a fall really happened. It just came up organically, she said. In my family, nothing has ever come up organically except illness. I said goodnight, hung up, and stood in my kitchen doing what I do at work, reading the chart. Somewhere, a meeting about me had taken place. I just couldn't see the room yet. That Saturday, I drove to my mother's with a casserole, because in the Midwest you cannot confront anyone without also feeding them. She was at the counter addressing Christmas cards, this year's again, the grandkids alone on that same porch. She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Don't make waves, honey, she said before I'd even taken my coat off. Dana's under so much pressure with the little ones. It's one Christmas. One Christmas. That's what people say about the holiday that isn't theirs to lose. I asked, quietly, whether she'd been in the room when this new rule was invented. She straightened her stack of envelopes instead of answering. It's what's best for the children, she finally said, the church version of pleading the fifth. And standing there watching her line up cards for the women at her congregation, I understood something. My exile was never really about hovering ants. It was about a seating chart where a woman's worth gets counted the way a farmer counts acreage in grandchildren. A divorced daughter with no stroller doesn't tie neatly onto a card. On my way out, I set the casserole down beside her open mail, and my eye caught a bank statement, a line item I recognized better than my own pulse because it was mine. I looked away fast, out of 6 years of habit. That habit is the part of this story I'd been keeping even from myself. 6 years earlier, my father died of a heart attack in the garage, radio still playing. After the funeral, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table, me specifically, the one who handles things, and opened a folder. He'd taken a loan against the lake house for a failing roof, a dying furnace, and quiet help given to a relative none of us knew about. With his pension gone, she couldn't cover the payments, the taxes, or the insurance. The house, the porch, the water, every Christmas we'd ever had, was roughly a year from being sold out from under us. She cried into a dish towel and asked for two things: help and secrecy. If your brother and sister find out the house isn't paid off, it changes how they remember your father. I was 32, still deep in fertility treatments, with no children to save for, a steady paycheck, and a hole in my chest exactly the size of being needed. Of course I said yes. I saw the warning sign. I'm not naive. I wrote the number down and had her sign a small note, nurse habit, everything documented. Then I set up the automatic payment, $600 a month on the first, for 72 payments and counting, more than $40,000 over 6 years, out of a nurse's salary in complete secrecy. My brother believed the house was free and clear. My sister planned every holiday menu around it. So when my sister announced that Christmas at the lake house was for parents only, here is the math nobody else in that chat could do. I had just been banned from the one house in the family that had my name quietly stitched into its bills. The room where that decision was actually made found me by accident. 9 days after the text, my niece video called to show off her science fair volcano, and mid-eruption mentioned, casual as weather, that her mom had said I wasn't coming, hadn't been, actually, since Halloween. There was a whole planning chat for it. I wasn't in it, she thought. I kept my voice level and did the math. 6 weeks. Through the entire month of November, while I strung my mother's porch lights, drove her to a cardiology appointment, picked up my niece and nephew on my sister's long days, a second, hidden conversation had been deciding I was clutter. And the detail that took my breath away. My mother was in that chat too. She'd known for 6 weeks and let me keep climbing her ladder and checking her heart while saying nothing. I had assumed her silence in the family thread was cowardice in the moment. It wasn't. It was policy. You can survive being wounded by your family. What buckles your knees is discovering the wound had been scheduled, put on a calendar, discussed, agreed to, while you were out buying their children's stocking gifts. That night I called no one. I went into work early instead. Ruth took one look at me and set down her crossword. Sit, she said, you're leaking. That was her word for feelings. So I told a patient the truth about my own life for once, the text, the second chat, the 6 weeks of silence. She listened the way she must have once watched students during an exam, hands folded, missing nothing. Then she told me her own story, flat as a proof. 50 years teaching other people's children, 30 years hosting Thanksgiving with the good silver. Then her hip gave out, and she couldn't host or drive or be useful anymore. Count the visitors, Wendy, she said, nodding at her own door. I could name exactly one, a distant relative who'd stayed 20 minutes to take a photo for a fundraiser. She turned her teacup a quarter turn, precise as always, and delivered the line the way you deliver a theorem. I spent my whole life buying my seat at that table. Turns out I was only ever renting it. The clock in her room was loud that night, I remember that clearly. Rent comes due every month forever, she said. The moment you can't pay, the chair disappears, and they act like it was never there at all. Then, gentler than I'd ever heard her, don't wait until this bed to learn the arithmetic, girl. You're the best math I've seen in years, and you're spending it on people who round you down. I drove home at midnight with my hands steady on the wheel and something enormous shifting under my ribs, slow as lake ice cracking in March. At my kitchen table, I opened my laptop. I want to be precise about why. I wasn't drafting a speech for my family. I've watched 100 families deliver speeches over hospital beds, and speeches are always for the speaker, never the listener. I opened the laptop because an ad had been following me around the internet all week like a hopeful stray. A woman my age alone at a ship's rail, gold W. 8 or behind her, no opinion anywhere in the frame. 7 nights through the Eastern Caribbean, sailing out on December 23rd. Exactly 1 balcony suite left, a holiday cancellation, king bed, a real bathtub, something I hadn't owned in 9 years. All in, just under $5,000. I sat looking at the payment screen, and then did the thing that still makes my throat tighten to describe. I logged into the account labeled Someday, 4 years untouched, waiting for a child who was never coming, and pointed the transfer straight at it. Someday, it turns out, has a date attached if you're brave enough to choose one. I chose December 23rd. I paid in full. The confirmation arrived with a cheerful little animation, tacky and wonderful, and I sat in my quiet kitchen and smiled for the first time in 9 days. Then I renamed the account. It's called Now. Before I tell you what those photographs set off, tell me something. Have you ever been told politely, sweetly, with a heart emoji attached, that you simply didn't count anymore? If you've ever been the one crossed off the list, drop a comment and tell me where you were standing when you found out. I read every single one. And subscribe, because what my family did once they discovered exactly where I was spending Christmas, I still don't fully have words for it, and I was there for all of it. I kept my announcement small on purpose. 2 lines in the family thread, 5 days before my flight. Confirmed, I'll be away for the holidays. Enjoy the lake house. You would have thought I'd confessed to a crime. My sister replied in under a minute. Away where? 2 question marks, which from her counts as a full alarm. My sister-in-law tried the concerned angle. Is everything okay? This seems sudden. Sudden? They'd had a secret planning chat about my absence since Halloween. I'd simply agreed with their own decision a little faster than scheduled. My brother sent nothing at all, which is entirely on brand for him. Then my mother called, and I watched her name glow on the counter through 4 full rings before I answered. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't ask if I was hurt. People are going to ask where you are, she said. What am I supposed to tell them? There it was, the entire engine of my family, idling in a single sentence. Not concern for her daughter, alone in December. Concern for how her daughter's absence would look. I looked out at the parking lot below my apartment, at a plastic snowman glowing bravely in the cold, and felt strangely calm. Tell them the truth, Mom. Tell them I wasn't invited. Silence on the line. That's not fair, Wendy. Nobody said you weren't. And she stopped herself, because we both knew the next word was welcome, and neither of us could survive hearing her actually say it. I told her I loved her. I meant it, which is the most inconvenient part of this entire story. Then I hung up and finished packing. They wanted to control where I sat. Fine. They were about to find out exactly where I was, along with everyone else in the county. Nobody warns you how strange the logistics feel once you finally decide to matter to yourself. I hadn't taken a full week off in 14 years. My supervisor read the dates twice and asked if I was having surgery. I bought a white sundress, my first white anything since my wedding, and a wide straw hat my sister would have called ridiculous, which is exactly why I bought it. I handed off my patients one by one, with notes so thorough the relief nurse laughed reading them. One patient's daughter hugged me and said, "Good for you, honey. Go." A stranger's daughter managed the sentence my own mother never could. Ruth demanded to see the full itinerary, inspected the ship's specifications like she was grading a paper, and pronounced the plan adequate, which, from Ruth, was a standing ovation. So the childless get the Caribbean as a consolation prize, I told her deadpan. She laughed until she coughed, then said, "Send me a postcard from your actual life." I was still smiling when I got home to pack. That's when the evening caught on something. On top of my dresser sat my keys, car, apartment, my mother's spare, and one more, older and heavier, worn smooth at the shoulder. I stood there with my suitcase open and couldn't make my hand move past it. That key was brass, cut by my father's own hands at his workbench the summer I turned 16, a crooked letter carved into the head because he labeled everything he loved. He'd pressed it into my palm on that same porch, closing my fingers around it. "So you can always let yourself in," he'd said. "Don't knock, let yourself in." For 22 years, it had ridden beside my car key through every version of my life. The wedding, the clinics, the divorce, his funeral. It's the only thing I own that his hands made just for me. And now, banned from the very door it opened, I tried to slide it off the ring. Couldn't do it. So I did something that made no logical sense. I dropped the entire ring, brass key included, into my carry-on, where it would spend a week 2,000 miles from the only lock it fit. I told myself it was habit. It wasn't, and some part of me already knew that, standing there with snow ticking against the window. That key still had one more job to do. I just didn't know yet that the job wasn't opening anything at all. Fort Lauderdale, December 23rd, 81 degrees. I stepped out of the airport and the heat hit me like forgiveness. The ship was absurd in the best way, 14 decks of glittering excess, a crew member in white gloves who called me by name and meant it. My suite had a balcony wide enough for 2 loungers, and when I slid the door open, the ocean was simply there, all the way to the curve of the earth. Champagne waited on ice with a small card, "Welcome aboard. We're glad you're here." I read it twice. I stayed at the rail as we set sail, watching Florida slide backward, the whole continent that held my family, shrinking to a line, then a smudge, then nothing. My thumb found the crooked letter on the key in my bag without my even thinking about it. "Rent," Ruth's voice said in my head. "The moment you can't pay, the chair's gone." I won't pretend Christmas Eve was easy. The ship did it beautifully, garlands on every railing, a choir in the atrium, families everywhere in matching pajamas. For about 90 seconds at the rail, holding a glass of wine I never drank, the whole thing wobbled. Then a voice beside me said, "First holiday alone, you've got the face for it." An anesthesiologist from Atlanta, divorced 18 months, seated solo by choice. "My ex kept the in-laws," she said, deadpan. "Best part of the settlement." I laughed for real. We closed out the late seating with 2 widows from Michigan and a retired tugboat captain who'd cruised alone every Christmas for 9 years and called it my annual custody of myself. Nobody at that table asked why I wasn't with my family. They asked what I was reading. At midnight, alone on my balcony, ocean hissing along the hull, I checked my phone out of pure muscle memory. Full signal, midnight on Christmas Eve, and from my mother, my brother, and my sister, nothing. Not one message. That silence, meant as punishment, is exactly what made the next morning so easy. Christmas morning, somewhere south of nowhere, the sea was a shade of blue that felt almost rude to describe to anyone back in Ohio. I put on the white dress. My new friend met me on the top deck with mimosas and strong opinions about my hat. She took my phone and said, "Stand at the rail. You're going to want to remember being this free." Those photographs are still my favorites of my entire life. Me laughing, head tipped back. Me barefoot with my coffee. Gold water behind me. A long, empty morning deck, one woman, one horizon, nobody needing a single thing from her. I sat with my thumb hovering over the post button for a long moment. I want to be honest about what was actually in me because it matters. It wasn't revenge. If it had been revenge, the caption would have had edges, and believe me, I had drafts with edges in them. I deleted every one. What I finally typed was simple, "Merry Christmas," from someone who finally spent it exactly where she was wanted. No names, no story, no tags. The little loading wheel spun, and it went up to my ordinary, unremarkable page, where half my town lives, coworkers, church acquaintances, and every single member of my family. I set the phone face down and went to breakfast, genuinely believing I'd just posted a vacation photo. By the time we docked the next morning, 41 messages were waiting. My family had found the photos, and not one of them had written to say Merry Christmas. I read them as the harbor slid up to meet us, pastel and bright, and it felt like watching 2 weather systems collide. The first wave was warm coworkers, a cousin I hadn't heard from in 2 years, women from church saying things like, "I've never once done this for myself, and I'm 62. The second wave was my family, and the temperature dropped with every message. My sister first, "Wow, real classy on Christmas." Then 20 minutes later, "You couldn't give us one holiday without making it about you." I read that one twice. I'd been formally removed from the holiday, and my absence was somehow still about me being present. My sister-in-law came next, full committee chairwoman. "I hope you're proud. Your mother had to sit through church answering why her daughter's on a boat. You've embarrassed her, in front of the entire congregation." Not one message asked how I was doing. Not one asked if I was okay, alone at sea, on Christmas. Every single one asked what I was going to do about it. My brother called that evening, his tone pre-smoothed, the family's designated reasonable voice. "Nobody's mad," he opened, "which is what people say when everybody is." Boo. "T, you've made your point, take the posts down, you're making mom look bad." I gave that the silence it earned. "Walk me through it. It's a photo of me smiling, drinking coffee. No caption about anyone. Which part is the attack?" He exhaled the way he does when the numbers won't cooperate. "You know exactly what you're doing." "That's the problem," I said. "If a photo of me happy embarrasses this family, the problem was never the photo." The phone kept buzzing, but the message that actually broke something in me that week came at 6 the next morning from a coworker, and I knew before I opened it, the way you know a house has gone quiet. Ruth had died on Christmas night, in her sleep, no pain, exactly the exit she'd have graded highest. I cried on my balcony, for her, for the visitors who never came, and a little for the version of me who'd planned to be home in time to sit with her. Ruth had left instructions, of course. Among them was an envelope with my name on it. Because Ruth thought sympathy cards were morbid, it was the most aggressively cheerful get-well card the gift shop sold, daisies all over it. Inside, in wobbling schoolteacher cursive, "Sit down at your own table, girl." I looked at that sentence for a long time, then at my bag, at the brass key writing 2,000 miles from its lock. I finally admitted what some part of me had known back at the dresser. I hadn't packed that key to let myself back in. I'd packed it because part of me was already deciding whether to give it back. Meanwhile, without my permission, the photographs had grown legs. A stranger shared the deck photo into a large online community for solo travelers, with a one-line introduction. "This is my friend's first Christmas alone. Look at her face." By the next port, there were hundreds of comments, and I read them in the buffet line like a woman finally drinking water after a long fever. "Spent last Christmas crying in my car in the driveway. My family does immediate family only now too. I've been the free babysitter for 20 years, and nobody warns you the seat you built can vanish overnight." I had genuinely believed, right up until that buffet line, that what happened to me was a private family malfunction. It wasn't. It was a pattern, common enough that thousands of strangers recognized it on sight. That night my sister called, and I'm glad I picked up because it's the only time in this story I heard her real voice. She was crying, not angry crying, the other kind. "You don't get it. You post one photo and the whole world claps for you. I haven't slept a full night in 8 years. Being their mother is the only thing I have left when you get to be everything else." I felt the near miss of truly seeing my sister for the first time in years. Then she pulled the door shut again. "So take the posts down, please," I told her for the first time in 38 years plainly, no. "If you're still here, thank you." That week, hundreds of women were writing to me about holidays spent alone inside their own families. If that's ever been you, type the word table in the comments below. Now about the phone call that came at 6 the next morning and changed everything. My refusal went through the family like a stone through a greenhouse window. Within hours, I'd been pulled into a new thread, formal, unmistakably co-written by committee. The terms: delete the posts, apologize to my sister for the spectacle, apologize to my mother in person before it reached the whole congregation. Decline, and the family would have to reconsider my involvement in Mom's affairs going forward. Mom's affairs, translated from committee language, that meant the medication list in my purse, the cardiology appointments on my calendar, the pill box I fill every Sunday night. They were threatening to fire me from the job none of them had ever offered to help with, meant to be the nuclear option. They had no idea how little leverage that was, because they still didn't know what I'd truly been carrying, or what it would mean the day I finally set it down. One last line arrived, separately typed by my mother's own hand: "Please, Wendy, just come home." I sat with that a long time in the dark water between islands. They thought they were about to take something from me. None of them understood yet what I was about to hand back. I didn't answer that night. Instead, past midnight, I laid 2 objects on the little balcony table and did inventory, the way I do at a bedside. First, my banking app, autopay loaded and waiting like it had stood loaded 72 times before $600, lake house loan, taxes, insurance, the quiet machine keeping the porch lights on at a house I was no longer welcome inside. Second, the brass key itself, catching the deck lights, 22 years on my ring, a crooked letter cut by a man who genuinely believed, all the way down, that family meant a door that never locked. I thought about Ruth's arithmetic, buying versus rent. Ting, the chair that vanishes the day you stop paying. If I stopped and the chair vanished, Ruth was right, and it had never truly been mine. If I kept paying, I was simply funding a Christmas I'd been banned from and calling it love. There was no third option. There never had been. I just spent 6 years squinting for one that didn't exist. I fell asleep in that chair with the key in my fist. At 6 the next morning the phone rang. My mother had fallen. My brother delivered it with the grim satisfaction of a man serving a warrant. This is exactly what happens when you abandon this family. Here's where being a nurse turned out to be armor they'd forgotten I owned. I didn't panic, I triaged. Is she conscious? Did she hit her head? Who's with her? Drama doesn't enjoy intake questions. Conscious, no head strike, a neighbor already driving her in. I called my mother directly, and her voice, shaky but unmistakably her own, confirmed it: swollen wrist, x-ray, nothing broken, splint, home by evening. I stayed on the line 20 minutes, organizing what actually needed organizing: a meal schedule, a doctor's follow-up, my own daily 8 o'clock call. Real care. The kind I'm actually licensed in. Then my brother's next message landed, and I watched the fall get converted into currency in real time. Fly home today. Delete everything. Apologize to Dana. Mom says you're welcome at New Year's. All of it forgotten. Last chance. Welcome, there it was again, with a price tag stitched to the back of it, same as always. I want to be honest about the next hour because the easy version skips it. I looked up flights and sat with the idea nearly 40 minutes. The layover, the rehearsed apology, New Year's at the lake house, everything forgiven. 38 years of reflex doesn't unlearn itself on a Tuesday. Part of me wanted that offer so badly my hands ached. Then I reread it, really read it in the island sun. Not we're sorry, not we miss you. All of it forgotten, meaning the photos gone, the questions hushed, the congregation soothed, and me back in my old chair on the strict condition that I confirm none of it had ever mattered. They weren't offering to welcome me home. They were offering to erase the only month of my life I'd been fully, visibly happy. The price of readmission was the disappearance of the evidence, and the evidence was me smiling. Something in my chest went level and quiet, the way the sea does right before weather turns. It wasn't an invitation at all. It was the old contract, retyped, with a bow on it, renewal due that same day. I found my new friend at the coffee bar and told her everything. She did what good clinicians do, skipped the sympathy and went straight to the exam. If she were your patient's family, she said, stirring her espresso, some other version of you, some other boat, what would you call that message? I didn't even have to think. Leverage, she nodded, unsurprised. And what do you tell families who use leverage on the person taking care of them? I heard my own voice answer with a sentence I'd said gently in 100 kitchens to 100 frightened families. Love doesn't invoice. The words hung there over the espresso machine, and I almost laughed, because I'd spent 6 years on the wrong side of my own best advice. I had let love send me a bill every month and mistaken the payment for belonging. I walked back to my suite and did 3 things I should have done 6 years earlier. First, I answered my brother. No speech, no inventory of old wounds. Our mother was safe, splinted, fed. The neighbors and I had logistics covered. I'd call every morning at 8 because I was finished performing care but never finished providing it. The photos stayed up, nothing in them but a happy woman. Then I typed the sentence I'd carried since that first Wednesday before the Wi-Fi could talk me out of it. Dana said Christmas is only for parents now. Okay, then I'm only for me now. Beneath it, one line for my mother. The first of the month arrangement ends today. She knows what that means. Second, I called my bank. Autopay canceled, effective immediately. The loan, the taxes, the insurance, all 72 payments in 6 years and more than $40,000, undone in under 9 minutes from a deck chair in the Caribbean. Anything else I can help with? The agent asked. You have no idea, I said, and it was done. Third, slowly, on ship stationery with a real pen, I wrote my mother a letter. Private, no group thread, no audience. I told her the whole truth of the last 6 years, the folder, the promise, the first of every month. I didn't want $1 back and wasn't telling the church a word of it. And I set the only terms that ever needed setting. I will always show up for you as your daughter. I am done showing up as your staff. I folded it, and on top I placed the brass key, waiting for an envelope I'd buy in Fort Lauderdale. My father cut that key, so I see. I'd always let myself in. I was finally doing exactly that, just not to the house. Here's what it cost, because that's the part the cheering crowd never sees. The moment that autopay stopped, the lake house started dying with it. No one else could carry $600 a month. My brother wouldn't, my sister couldn't. The porch my father built, the dock I learned to skip stones from, would eventually sell to strangers. In saving myself, I was signing away the last place on earth that still held him in its walls. Both things were true at once, and I let them be. That's the entire trick of it, if there is one. I stood at the rail with the confirmation email glowing in my hand and said, out loud, to no one and to the whole Caribbean, the lease is up. Then I turned the phone off completely, a small black stone, and sat down at the solo traveler's table between my new friend and the tugboat captain, and for the first time in longer than I can tell you, I finished every bite of dessert. One message slipped through before the screen went dark, and I read it in the elevator. My mother, Wendy, please, not the house. 6 years of pretending that house paid for itself, and there it finally was, in her own handwriting, the quiet part put in writing at last. The last 2 days of that cruise were the quietest of my life, and not because my phone stayed off. A last afternoon on a beach like Sugar, then a long, empty sea day sailing home with the whole horizon to myself. When I finally powered the phone back on, the family thread had already burned through outrage and disbelief, and landed. Once my mother had been forced to explain to her own children exactly what she'd been paying, and why, in a strange, sputtering silence. My brother called once more, and his voice had lost its committee polish entirely. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked, sounding about 15 years old. "Because she asked me not to," I said, "and because I thought paying quietly was what love looked like. We were both wrong, and it isn't your fault, and it isn't only hers either." My sister sent one long, rambling, defensive, wounded message at 2 in the morning, and buried in the middle of it, almost hidden. I didn't know about the money, I swear I believed her. I wrote back once and kept it short. The truth was theirs to carry now. I owed no apology and wanted none. My door would stay open to anyone who walked through it as family, and closed to anyone who arrived holding an invoice. We sailed back into Fort Lauderdale at dawn, pelicans escorting us in like tired angels. At an airport shop, I bought a padded envelope, and at the post office counter, I mailed my mother the letter with the brass key sealed inside, and stood there a second with my hand flat against it the way you rest a hand on a patient at the very end. The clerk asked if the contents were fragile. "Very," I said. "It'll travel fine anyway." That envelope took 4 days to reach Ohio. What my mother did the day it arrived, I truly did not see coming. Here's the honest ledger of that winter, because I promised you the whole truth, not the tidy version. The lake house went up for sale in March. My brother passed on the numbers, my sister cried and still couldn't manage them. I was finished, and stayed finished, and grieved it anyway. You can be certain of a decision and still be sad about it. One aunt stopped speaking to me, telling anyone who'd listened that I'd chosen money over blood, from the one relative who never once drove our mother to an appointment, which had a certain shine to it. A couple of cousins went quiet in public and messaged me privately instead. "You did what the rest of us only talk about doing." The whispers lasted about a season before the town moved on, the way small towns always do. My sister never apologized outright. What she did instead, and I've decided to receive it as her particular dialect of a truce, was start sending me photos of the kids again by late January. Boots on the wrong feet, a lost tooth. I answered every single one warmly and said nothing further. That's where my sister and I live now. A small country, but a real one, with a border we both quietly respect. And the key never came back to me. My mother kept it. Wait until you hear why. A gray Sunday in late February, somebody knocked on my apartment door, and it was my mother, holding the old cookie tin she's used since before I was born. She'd driven the whole 10 minutes herself, which for her, in winter, counts as a genuine voyage. She stood in my small kitchen, a kitchen she'd never once set foot in during the 4 years I'd lived there. I realized as she looked around, small and brave and clearly terrified. She didn't apologize exactly, because women of her generation were never handed those particular words. What she said instead was, "Your father gave you that key so you'd always be able to let yourself in." She turned the tin over in her hands. "I've been carrying it in my coat pocket to remind me it was never the house that needed to stay open. It was me. I forgot the house was never the point." Then she asked, like a guest, my own mother, a guest at my table, whether she could stay for supper. We ate scrambled eggs and cookies from that old tin at my little 2-chair table, and she told me a story I'd never once heard, about my father getting the porch beams wrong the first time around, and we laughed, and neither of us brought up Christmas at all. It wasn't everything. My sister stayed my sister, exactly as complicated as ever. The church stayed the church, but at my table that night sat a woman learning, at 67, how to show up somewhere without a seating chart. People can surprise you, not nearly often enough, but sometimes. This Christmas, 1 year, almost to the day, since a text message reclassified me as furniture, my apartment held more people than I had chairs for, gathered around 2 mismatched tables pushed together under a cloth my father's own mother had embroidered decades ago. Coworkers from hospice between shifts. A neighbor with a ham that outclassed mine and knew it. Two women I'd met through that online community, now real friends, one of whom had spent the previous Christmas crying alone in her car and was now telling the story out loud, laughing. A card arrived from the tugboat captain. In one chair, set on purpose, no name attached, house rule now, always open for whoever needs it next. At 6 o'clock the doorbell rang, and it was my mother with the old tin, and my youngest niece on her hip, dropped off by my sister, who waved from the car, a sentence I've decided is worth keeping exactly as it is. My mother looked down the length of my crowded, mismatched, glorious table and asked where I wanted her to sit. Anywhere, I told her. At my table, there's no such thing as only. If you're here, you're family. We lit the candles. Someone's work pager went off mid-toast and the whole table laughed. And this March, I'm sailing again, 5 nights, a different route, booked straight out of the account now called now. Not to prove a single thing to anyone. Proof was last year. This trip is simply because the ocean and I have a standing appointment we both intend to keep. If you take just one thing from everything I've told you tonight, let it be this. A seat you have to keep paying for was never really yours to begin with. The only table worth sitting at is the one where love arrives without an invoice attached. That's my story, one text message before Christmas, one cabin with an ocean view, one brass key I finally gave back. If someone in your life has ever made you pay rent for a place in their heart, maybe tonight's the night you go back and read the lease. If this story reached you exactly when you needed it, send it to someone who could use it right now. Leave a comment and tell me about your own table. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe because the next story is waiting, and I promise you don't want to miss it.